Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Duke of Italy, favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and welcome back to a new video. You guys saw the title. We are doing another discography review, and this time we're covering someone, or a band for that matter, that I find particularly interesting, that I've been kind of popping off a little bit this past decade. This is the Blackgaze project by Chris Pandolfo, Clouds Collide. Now, I know you guys are probably thinking, Duke, you don't review good discographies, so you're just gonna rag on this poor man from Bandcamp? And to that I say, you know what? You're right. I'm only reviewing bad discographies so far. But guess what? It's a new year. Genre January's over, and after that kind of thing, I'm a changed man. I can't really go through that kind of thing without coming out unscathed, so this is entirely new. And you know, since the guy followed me on Instagram, I decided, you know what, why don't I cover his stuff, since I actually really like his material. Now, this isn't actually the first time I'm mentioning Clouds Collide. Way back over the summer, I covered actually his first album that was a part of a Blackgaze chart. That chart was okay. That wouldn't be my pick for the best Clouds Collide album, but it was probably his second best. Also, that chart in general wasn't the best. A couple of those albums were not even Blackgaze. Also, I think that's probably one of my weaker videos just overall, so take half the things I even say there with a grain of salt. But I am digressing a little bit, because that thing actually did get me really into Blackgaze, and while my sort of point of view on the subject at the time, I even say multiple times in the video, was weak, I've definitely covered a lot more stuff since then, and the whole atmospheric black metal kind of thing has really resonated with me, and as a result, I've really gotten into the Clouds Collide discography. Now, another thing is, oh, Duke, you only cover the studio album, so this is going to be a short video. You're covering 3 albums today. That's not true. Today I'll actually be covering the split LP and an EP as well, just because I thought, you know what, they're worth checking out. And I really think they're worth checking out, for the most part. We'll get into that. Now, I will be linking Clouds Collide's Instagram in the description. You can look him up on Spotify, which I actually recommend over Bandcamp. Of course, buy the material from Bandcamp. I think the latest LP is on vinyl. You can get All Things Shining on CD, and you can get this awesome shirt right here on the website. I'll probably show you what it looks like. But what is Clouds Collide? Clouds Collide is an experimental shoegaze, post-rock, post-metal, aka Blackgaze project by the one and only Chris Pandolfo. And the whole concept for the LPs, at least so far, is based actually off of Chris's mother, who passed away from cancer. Which I gotta say, rest in peace Chris's mother. I'm sure she would be very proud of the material here. So without further ado, let's get into the material. The first LP is Until the Winds Stop Blowing from 2013. Now this I actually mentioned in my previous video. This is probably their most true to form Blackgaze record. It's an incredibly icy release, very cold sounding, and it does have a few trends that are followed in the later albums that start here. For example, ambient samples here, particularly wintry sounds. This actually indicates how this album is the first in a 4-album series, the 4th album of which is not out yet, which I'm actually very excited for. By the trajectory of the albums, it looks like it will actually come out later this year, so I'll definitely be covering that when it comes out. But this album is actually based on winter, and it actually deals with the actual concept of the death of Chris's mother and sort of how he deals with it. Of course, about every album is kind of that same similar idea, but they're all in different stages. So already a very strong, very emotional and gripping idea that easily resonates with a listener. So anyway, Until the Wind Stops Blowing, the first track, As If a Dead Leaf. So the tone is set super well with these ambient wind samples and this really distant guitar over the back. It's a really pleasing soundscape that's set up. And then you get a massive kick of emotion with this blast beat that just kind of rushes through. And if I haven't mentioned it enough before, this thing feels cold. Absolutely cold. And a lot of people criticize Blackgaze for not necessarily touching upon the themes of black metal as much, but if you want the cold atmosphere of black metal, this album still has it. And we actually get a healthy dose of Chris's singing voice on this album. This is actually the album where by far he sings the least, and it kind of only shows up for this song, but it's kind of like Have a Nice Life-ish in terms of tonality. It's also incredibly distant. It sounds almost like a ghost. That is, of course, until he switches to his screams, which actually feel like pins on your skin. They are brutal. It's just a seriously massive amount of anguish you feel. Later on in the song, you actually get the tremolo guitar finally, which is a really nice ambient touch to just pretty much everything that Chris has released, actually. And as you'll see in later projects, this song was actually given a pretty significant boost due to the shifts in the drumming. It sort of alternates back and forth. And as you guys could probably see on Chris's Instagram, he does like showing off his drumming more than anything else, at least at the moment. So it's not hard to understand that he definitely alternates on that a lot. So after that track, we reach the 10-minute track, Endless Silence. So this track, like a couple more later on, has a very doomy, almost DSBM type pacing to it. This song feels just as icy as ever, and it is really, really good. Now, it has a relatively standard shift from the sort of Blackgaze into the blast beat section, but it hits just as hard as ever. And then there's these double kicks that actually come in a bit later. And the way that they are mixed just so distantly is actually kind of reminds me of Paysage d'Hiver in a way. Paysage d'Hiver is way more lo-fi than this, but the ambience is definitely there. And there's a lot of really creative cymbal usage on top, which I dig a lot. About halfway through the track, you actually get a slowing down of the pacing, which becomes brutally oppressive. It's agonizing. And you got the guitar with these really light, sort of higher pitch sounds just kind of poking through with their tones. It's a bit like an Aurora Borealis, how it's just kind of distant. And after that, it's got like this black metal drone type effect. It's pretty awesome. And if the tone of sorrow hasn't been set before, it is definitely set right now. Following this, we get the 11-minute Glaciate. Or Glaciate. I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's the name of the song. Which it starts again with just that distant guitar tone. And here the guitars actually get layered, which are really nice, and the lyrics are just so sad. This is truly like where the narrator gives up. This is the most depressive, suicidal black metal part of probably the album and even the discography. And this is where the guitar riffs turn truly dismal, almost angular, and the vocals turn just rage-filled. And it depicts the narrator in just such an amount of pain where he can like barely hold on to these memories. It's brutal. It's absolutely heart-wrenching what some of these songs can do to you. There's also this crazy lyrical bit about being completely frozen in place, and that's just one of the most rough moments of the whole song. The repetition of the pseudo hook every winter feels the same is deeply poetic and very painful as well. And it's even better when actually at the tail end of the track it comes back one last time. And there's this sort of broken sonic quality around 6 minutes in that's just, it's so brutal. It's actually a bit tear-inducing. And then around this time there's the guitars almost shift to like an ambient type of tone over the top, and it's really awesome. And the glacial pace, pardon the pun, just packs so much into its time length, which it is 11 minutes long. You kind of need to do that, but it doesn't disappoint. And the acoustic guitar to just round it all out is just the most beautiful thing. Next we get the track Epoch of Ice. It's got this really nice tense progression that's got like these synths and these drums over each other. And they slowly layer more and more and more. And this is more DSBM territory where the anguish is just brutal. It's really rough to listen to. And Chris's screams are now even more bitter than they were before somehow. If there's anything about this track that differentiates it from the other tracks here, there's this drum just cataclysm towards the end of it where it's almost like it's trying to jumpstart itself in the song from this pretty slow pacing, and then it just rushes forward. It's it is pretty amazing. Next we get the track Deathless, which is a short 2.5 minute black metal just furious track of just straightforward like just tremolo and blast beats, and it is really nice sonic just sort of field here, and the riffing is gorgeous, and there's a vocal sample that is haunting, and it rubs just the right way. Honestly, I do wish it was mixed just a little more clearly so I could tell what he's saying the whole time, but there are some parts that I can pick out that are pretty emotionally impactful. Next we reach the 8-minute track The Way the Wind Blows. And at this point in the track list, I'd say that this track is probably the most forgettable. It kind of does blend in with the other tracks a little bit, as at least in terms of the first leg. It is kind of normal in terms of Clouds Collide standards up to this point. It does become kind of progressive with the blast beat sections that kind of loop out, and there are more laid back portions as well, and they kind of go back and forth. There's a nice bit where everything kind of gets buried under piano, where there are these lyrical motifs about lost memories, and it's brutal because it's hard to really describe the impact the lyrics leave here, although they are mixed, not the best. You can read them on Bandcamp, and they're rough. And the last stanza of lyrics in particular are particularly gut-wrenching. The last track, I'm not going to try and pronounce for you guys. It's in French, but it is based off a poem, actually. It's actually based off of Paul Verlaine's Autumn Song, which is actually what the first track has a lyrical bit from as well. A lot of this album as a whole is actually kind of based off of this poem here. But this track has this beautiful drony guitar, and it has a really nice way of sort of rounding off the album in a complete sense. It kind of harkens back to the beginning, and it kind of completes the emotions. And there's not even screaming here, it is just completely instrumental. It still somehow retains that emotion. And the piano is very gorgeous just over everything. Now, final thoughts about this album. Don't try to think too hard about it. The main way you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of it is if you just kind of sink into it. If you try and pick out every individual tone, it's going to be a lot harder to adjust like that. This isn't prog necessarily. There is some progressive structures, but definitely don't try and pick out the most crazy polyrhythms or anything. But there are a lot of emotional highs here, and just the concept of Blackgaze is given a really nice body with this album here. And I think the lo-fi aesthetic, while it doesn't work perfectly every time, I think sometimes the guitars aren't as effective as they could be. It does work most of the time. But this is a phenomenal release overall. I think everything kind of works together just about well enough. I kind of love this release. I'm giving this a come to Brazil. Next, we get sort of a compilation of ambient pieces, the 2014 EP NYC. So this actually starts off with the track NYC. This actually retains some similar motifs that Clouds Collide have been doing so far. It's got some guitar, but it's got a sample, and this time it's actually rain, which I guess there is no season really to give to rain, so I guess you can kind of just give some emotion behind it, so it kind of works in its own concept. And it's almost slowcore the way everything kind of shifts around here. And now, while I wasn't sold on this track at first, it definitely grows on you. And it honestly almost sounds like a less fuzzy Have a Nice Life for some reason. Next we get the track Jupiter, where you get these actually really spacey ambient synths, and it's almost unreal with just how grand and large everything sounds here. And it's got this nice piano playing with these ambient synths underneath, and it's really quite mesmerizing. And it's gorgeous with these slow shifts. It's almost like the actual ambient pull of space. I would say though that this track doesn't necessarily end, it just kind of stops. I mean, it is fine for what it is though. And the EP concludes with the track Fear of Exits. This is an ambient mix of a few different textures here. It's got a distant synth, but some more upfront, hollow sounding synths. And it feels just as spacious as anything else so far. Now, this is very beautiful, but I'd say this is the weakest track on the EP, as it doesn't really seem to progress all that much. So final thoughts on this EP, this is a 3-song collection here. It is not the most organized, not everything here seems to be fully in conjunction with each other, while on the LPs, they will transition seamlessly, literally with the end of one song being the beginning to the next. But on here, it's almost as if some of the songs don't even end quite right, and the next song doesn't even really start quite right either. And, you know, it is a little disjointed, but if you take it at face value of just a collection of songs, it is a decent little collection here. And there's not really any filler. It's just an all-around pleasant release. This one actually gets my first iFunny on this channel. And the next release we get is actually the Opalestial split release between the bands Sleeping Peonies, I don't know how to pronounce it, I hope it's like that, and Clouds Collide, of the halves Opal and Alestial. First we get Opal with the Sleeping Peonies side. I will discuss a little bit with how this one goes, just to kind of give you a full idea of the whole split here. I will admit, I'm not in love with this side. I think it's a weird combination of like witch house, lo-fi pop, and blackgaze. And Blackgaze is already a bit of a disjointed idea just as is, and it does take some real emotion to get it working properly, but it's just kind of too many elements in the mix, and having the electronic drums in the background just feels fake and almost a little low effort. It's just really not for me. So the core songs in this album aren't really for me, but the first and last songs are a lot more ambient, and I actually dig them a whole lot. The track Moonlit Rainbow actually starts off the bit, and it's just so fuzzy, and I actually really dig it. And the last track is just as strong in its ambiance. It's really fuzzy, it's a bit spacious. Also, it's emotionally gratifying. But overall, I don't think I would recommend this half of the split anyway. It does feel a bit disjointed from the second half anyway. And for such a conceptual sort of brand of a genre, that even if it is black metal adjacent, it just feels a little weird to have a split like this. But you know, there is still some stuff to be appreciated from this first half. But anyways, let's get into Alestial. So Alestial starts with the track Migration. So it starts with this pretty straightforward black metal type progression here, which is just this brutal assault of tremolo and blast beats, but it is almost immediately cut with a lot more of a minimalist guitar riff. And the lyrics on this part are actually more clear than they've ever been on a Clouds Collide release so far, and I actually kind of like it. The more higher fidelity production type Clouds Collide material I actually find better than the lo-fi stuff. Also, the piano that leads this track out is a really nice touch. Next, there's the track Inheritance. So this track is kind of typical for a Clouds Collide release so far, except around the middle, there's a part where you hear the bass mixed in a way where the sliding is like super crunchy and effective, and I kind of love that touch here. At this point, there are kind of some rare moments that you have to grasp on these releases rather than just sinking into them, and this is definitely one of those bits. And throughout this whole song, there is some really beautiful tremolo that I think is really effective. Next, we actually get the track Solstice, which starts off with this really gripping shoegazy type opening. So the riffing here actually is very dark, and it gets more and more gripping as it goes along. And the lyrics on this track are a serious downer. But honestly, at this point, I'd say this might be their best song. And this song is a very tough message to digest, but it's actually a very important one. So I actually recommend checking this track out for yourself, as it is one of the strongest Clouds Collide songs so far. And this is rounded off with the 10-minute track Patience. Now it's got a really nice strong start with some light guitar over the top of the track, and Chris's singing voice actually works really well with this type of production. And the lyrics here do kind of have the same themes that have been going on the album so far, but I'm okay with it as it is a strong theme. And it's super atmospheric, it really builds it really nicely. And at the third verse, you actually get Chris's screams, which are earth-shattering the way they're mixed. It's so good. It's just the right blend of distant and upfront. It's just right in that sweet spot. It's amazing. So yeah, despite it being a 10-minute song, it's just filled to the brim with emotionally evocative music. So for this split, at least for Celestial, despite an odd bit or two, I'd say it is an extremely strong and tight performance, and for a Blackgaze project, it says a whole lot within its short time frame. This one's a Based and Red Pilled. So we've finally gotten past the EPs. Unfortunately, there are no more for now, but if he releases another one, I'll be glad to listen. But now we get the spring-themed All Things Shining from 2015. So this album kicks off with Turquoise Rose. So this actually starts off with some ambient water sounds here. And in my sort of thinking here, it's almost like the ice has just been melting and now it's starting to go down, which is a really nice transition to the emotions of this album. There's still a sense of grieving and there's still a sense of coping, but it's not quite the abyssal dread. And I'll tell you guys straight up, while I do like a more positive spin on this, I think the sort of black metal aesthetic is really tough to get anything happy going, and a lot of the more hopeful stuff behind this album is a lot tougher to get with. I'll be honest. So anyways, there is some light singing over the top as you get the guitars that fill in. And overall, it's pretty minimalist, but it is pretty. And the singing ends, and it fills in with just this really nice emotional tremolo. And I just love how, depending on the effects placed upon the tremolo, it's actually a totally different texture depending on what's going on. And the synths on this track are pretty nice, but I am not entirely sure about the drum machine that ends the track. Next, we get the track Hope and Bliss. This is an 11-minute long epic, and it's actually a lot of people on Bandcamp's favorite. Unfortunately, I would probably say this might be my least favorite Clouds Collide song, and the reason for that is that there is a whole lot of singing on this track, and on this album you'll probably see that this is the most sung album by Clouds Collide. Maybe the next album is sung, probably not as much even. It's still sung a lot, but this album's sung the most, and the lyrics you can pick out pretty well actually, as this album does mix them just a little more upfront, a little less snowy and distant. They are a bit more upfront. You can understand Chris a bit better, but some of the lyrics are just a bit, I don't really want to call them cringy, but they're just a little flat. They're not that evocative. They're not as flowery as they could be, and the metaphors are just in your face. Like it literally mentions like a glass half empty and a glass half full. And as flowery as black metal gets, or Blackgaze for that matter, like I think of Melting Sun by Lant Lost, probably my favorite Blackgaze release of all time, at least in the top 5. But then again, Blackgaze is a phenomenal genre, so those spots can switch around all the time. The lyrics on that album are gorgeously flowery, and they're just so beautiful. And just after seeing a standard like that set, it's kind of hard to settle for glass half full, glass half empty. But fortunately, there are later moments on this album, and especially on the next album, where the lyrics do get a bit of a boost. Anyways, the song starts, and it starts with these really nice reverbial guitars. And this album at this point is definitely a lot happier than the previous release, which is a pretty significant change after seeing how the last album was paced. But we do still get a nice healthy dose of the screams, and it's nice to get that still that grieving sense through the screams, and it's just showing that like even if there are now times that we're happy, we can just remember back, and it can still hit you like a ton of bricks. And while this is my least favorite Clouds Collide track, it is by no means a bad one. About a third through, it just gets a massive boost, and part of that is due to the sonic quality of about a third through, where all these sonic layers just sort of crash together. And at about 2/3 in, you get a really nice, groovy sort of drum lick that's going around. Now, this is pretty much Alcest with some groove behind it. If you guys like Alcest, you're going to like the song most likely. And the track actually leads out with some really just furious blast beats and some of Chris's best vocals so far, at least in the screams department. It's almost as like he forgot the pain so far, but like then he just like sits down and it just all just at once he remembers it all. It's, oh man, it's brutal. I really feel it. Next we get the track Admiring the Clouds, actually probably one of my favorite tracks on this album. It's got a nice building drum rhythm with some shoegaze effects underneath. And this track takes quite a lyrical approach, which sometimes for Clouds Collide, especially in this album, misses, but here it hits particularly well. And for the first time, and not the last time on this album, we actually get a vocal hook here, and it's actually quite good. Just, man, that repetition of "it happens all the time" it kind of harkens back to the last album actually with "Every Winter is the Same," but "it happens all the time" is just, it's almost like a more modern depiction of the black metal ideas, because black metal is very primitive in almost all of its concepts, except that it's electric guitar, I guess. But the idea of like "it happens all the time," like despite it being such an emo phrase, like it's so hard to not feel that sometimes. It's just like the pain just comes back and back and back, and you just can't escape it sometimes. And the drums are just firing off in the back the whole time. It's gorgeous. Next we get the track Every Drop of Rain, which is kind of an epilogue to Admiring the Clouds. It's got some really pretty strings in the back. And I think Chris has a guest vocalist here. I didn't see her name anywhere, but she has some nice harmonizing with Chris, and it's so beautiful. And it is a very pleasant track. Well, maybe not entirely necessary, it is certainly pleasant. And as far as I don't like drum machine on previous Blackgaze stuff, and even previously on this album, here it's actually quite nice towards the end with some synths over the top. After that we get the 8-minute long track Blossom. Now this continues from the end of Every Drop, but a lot more of an intense drony sound. And this song gets more and more intense with guitar, which soon becomes quite satisfying. And this track is a slow build, and it really takes a second to get there. And the lyrics do come in, which is a fairly standard Clouds Collide kind of switch up at this point. But when the screams come in, it is something to behold. Just the way it transitions. Wow, I mean, you've probably heard of that kind of transition before. Here, it's just as effective as it's always been. And the lyrics here are actually quite good. I find them very introspective. And there are a lot of analogies about like reaching happiness when things turn south, and it's very nice touch. I recommend you guys read it up for yourself. And the song actually ends with something kind of new for Clouds Collide. It's got these sort of minimalist drones with Chris just like screaming over the top, and it's brutal, but it's really nice. This actually leads into the 11-minute long track Perihelion, and this actually has a polyrhythmic build that switches up into a blast beat. It's one of the most satisfying Clouds Collide moments so far, and it's probably one of the highlights of the album for sure. Actually, scratch that. That is probably the highlight of the album. And the shifts here are fast and super effective. The way just that you get these Blackgaze sections between the more drony and introspective moments with the furious blast beats that would just be these anguished screams over the top. And it has a really nice way of keeping the track fresh. There's a building portion of the song that's got like this nice bass rhythm underneath, and just these drums that are kind of building up higher and higher that I found very appealing. It sort of seems like it's going to lead the track out with the way the screams are layered over everything, but we actually get sort of a 2-minute outro bit with violin and this guitar that's layered underneath, and it's one of the best soundscapes on the album. Next we get the track Every Ray of Light, which has this gorgeous shoegazy post-rock type build to it. And while the song doesn't have any lyrics, it does have a gorgeous soundscape, even if that is sort of its only purpose here. It doesn't really reach an emotional height as a post-rock track I would want. But it's effective for it being a short little track here. Next we reach the track Eternal Warmth. It's got a really satisfying repetitive riff that just gets built upon. And at the peak of it, it reaches a super nice wash of sound. Some of the lyrics here are pretty emotional, even in comparison to the rest of this album, because they're kind of about missed opportunities in life and how after death they're kind of gone and there's really no way to reach them. There's a lot of discussion about like beaches and just beautiful flowery imagery here, which I've been craving from Clouds Collide so far, and Chris delivers strongly here. This track is kind of a send-off to Chris's mother, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And the album ends with the track Only You. And lyrically, this rounds things off all the way back from Turquoise Rose. And it rushes through with just this bright burst of sound. It's so beautiful. And I can really tell that this thing is almost meant to feel like water in how it's played. And as much as before it was kind of letting go, now it almost feels like a complete circle once again. And it's a very satisfying ending. So what do I think of this album overall? It does still have a bit of that lo-fi aesthetic before, which lo-fi aesthetics I can get with a lot. I mean, obviously I love black metal and Blackgaze in general. I mean, especially Autumn for Crippled Children, which is another Blackgaze band you guys should totally check out. But here, the sonics don't exactly hit all the time, but they do hit most of the time. And some of the ideas on this album are rehashed from previous releases, of course. And I do think that some of the post-rock bills aren't that effective either, but the emotional direction taken with this album is very interesting, and I think a lot of the brighter tones are nice. And I like that these tracks have a few more hooks to them. While they're not sung like a full-on chorus, I mean, that's a little too cheesy for Clouds Collide here. They're nice things to grab onto, and it's just a really catchy phrase that just sort of hooks itself into your head, and you're like, wow. I mean, it really does happen all the time. I mean, what can I say? So yeah, I'm feeling a Holy Roman Empire on this one. Also, on this album in particular, the Spotify very high quality stream sounds a lot better than the Bandcamp stream. So if you want to listen to it, I'd recommend probably doing that through Spotify, but totally purchase the album. So Chris takes a 4-year break with not a lot of things that come out, but he does release a single called Cosmic Loneliness, and this is the first track off of the new album, They Don't Sleep Anymore, which is, you guys see that right there. That is the shirt I got on right now. And this is actually, on at least on Rate Your Music, the lowest rated album of Chris's, and it's a real shame because honestly with you guys, this is the best Clouds Collide release in my opinion, and I think it's one of the best Blackgaze releases of all time. I have discussed this before. I used to describe it as if it had Gojira type screams to it. That's not true. Just because they're a bit more upfront, bit less washed out, and there is a bit less of a lo-fi aesthetic. There's better production here, but there is a big benefit here. Chris knows how to use the money towards production here, because this album sonically is the best. It is gorgeous all the way through. The soundscape never fails, not even once. And the title, They Don't Sleep Anymore, is actually based off of a speech where if you listen to Godspeed You Black Emperor, you might recognize it from the track Sleep, as Murray Austral is actually giving this speech. So this is the third LP in the series, and this LP has a massive emphasis on nostalgia. And this cover is actually a picture of Chris's parents from Jones Beach in '76. And you know, despite me not knowing Chris's parents, the first time I saw this album cover, it just resonated so well with me. I was like, wow, I feel like I know those people somewhere. And this album actually brings up those themes a whole lot. It's a lot about nostalgia, and there's still a sense of grieving, and there's a massive sense of sadness. Obviously, you're going to get that with the Blackgaze release. And let's get into my favorite Clouds Collide release. So if you guys look at the track list on this one, you will notice immediately that there are only 5 tracks here, and I think that's actually one of the best strengths of this thing. This thing is very low in terms of filler. I think there's like the amount of flaws I can count on like one hand, and they are all in the last track, unfortunately, but everything else here is airtight and as solid as possible. Just the sonic punch is just massive and powerful. It's in your face. It's brutal. The screams are up front. You can hear them. You can understand Chris's words. Thank God. You can never do that, but it's just great. First, we get the just shy of 9 minutes long Entanglement, which is actually, I think he said it was based off of like some like is something with physics. I'm gonna be honest. You have to dig into his Instagram to find that one, but it sounded cool. So you actually get some sort of beachy type ocean sounds where I was like, oh shoot, is this the same kind of samples as the last album? It's not. It's a bit more beachy. I think you hear gulls in the distance. I wasn't quite sure about that, but that's what it sounds like. But you got this really nice, pleasing guitar with like these washed out drums in the background, and it's almost like it's being played from like someone's car or from like a loudspeaker on like a boardwalk. And it immediately gives you just the most nostalgic feeling. Like I heard this and I'm like, oh, I've been there. And I'm like, but where's that? Like, I don't know. It legitimately makes you feel like you're walking on a boardwalk and you have been awake for 22 hours straight. And then it starts, and we haven't seen this for a couple albums now, but you're filled in with these gorgeous double kicks. and it gives it such a bassy boost, and it gives it so much body. Like one of my biggest complaints about the last album was how sort of high end it sounded, not like in terms of like low or hi-fi, but just like way up in terms of just the mix. And then you got these double kicks, they fill it entirely. There's so much energy put behind this whole thing, and that's kind of why I like Paysage d'Hiver. I mean, I know it's double kicks the entire time, but it's always an effective thing. Like, I love it. And this is like the best soundscape in the discography so far. Just the mix between the bass and the guitars and those double kicks and the blast beat, it's so huge. You get a whole soundscape in the drum kit, and the vocals are awesome. The better mixed singing vocals is exactly what they needed to be as pleasing as possible. And you got these dreamy guitars with the double kicks. And the drum work on this album, I'm going to tell you straight up, it's the best in the discography. If you look at his Instagram, you see all those posts about the drum work, and you watch him do that, and you're like, oh yeah, that's cool. But he's just switching back and forth. He's hitting on the offbeat. He's hitting on the downbeat. He's going back and forth. He's switching between cymbals, and he's just crashing at moments. It's just so dynamic and almost eclectic. The song actually gets this really crunchy sounding blast beat, which is just it's satisfying. And there's actually like several different drum builds on this track, and every one of them is satisfying. And these lyrics are pretty cryptic, or at least implicative rather than literal, and the lyrical switch it's so nice to me. About 3/4 through the track, you get like a minor break of just a couple seconds, and the guitars just punch through and just break that silence. And it's filled in with this really fuzzy, just monstrous sounding bass tone. It's almost like stoner doom metal with how just big it sounds, and it's one of the best things to add to the soundscape. The song sounds so nostalgic and gorgeous, and it's unreal how good it is. And next we get the single Cosmic Loneliness. And the first impressions are amazing. It's got these absolutely humongous guitar bits, and they're layered gorgeously. And we got no more blast beats and double kicks, and they are oppressive. And the guitar work alternates between these crunchy, almost angular sounding rhythms and these more drawn out and meditative sort of shoegaze, sort of like tremolo bits. It's a really nice mix, and it's a really healthy dose of energy. And the screams here are right up front, and they're absolutely brutal. And I actually think they have more emotion in them than previous albums. And there's an instrumental slow bit with a slow, almost doomy drum groove, but it has these rapid kicks underneath, and I just adore this bit. And now we get, especially here, just some of the best flowery lyrics that I've seen on a Clouds Collide release so far. And the bass groove towards the end is so satisfying with these little vocal grooves where he says, "I feel hatred coming back." And it's got the bass and the snare rolls and the double kicks. Oh my lord, is it good. Next we get the 11-minute long Golden Youth. Starts off with some more amazing soundscapes started just with the guitar, and then we get probably some of the best singing Chris has done so far. Every album it's just gotten better and better. And after the vocal bit, "I Will Never Desert You," there's this insane drum lick that thing could bring me back to life. It is so good. And these nice tremolo riffs that are so bitter, and they feel so betrayed. It's really got that black metal aesthetic, despite this being so warm and not lo-fi. And I gotta admit, the bass work and double kicks all over this album give it such a more full sound, and it's still going strong here. And there are vocal bits that lead the song out that are just so gorgeous, and I love them. Next we get probably my favorite track on the album, Parallel Ruminations. It's about 11 minutes long. So this track starts off with these synths that start it all off, with these nice guitars that are layered on top eventually. And the synths have such a sick little groove, and there's honestly like 3 different instrumental hooks here that your ears can latch onto just so easily, and you're like, oh yeah, that's the song that does that. And one of the reasons I like the song so much is it's probably the most energetic song on the album, and it's actually brutal just how much is in the first 3 minutes. And there's like a really nice Blackgaze breakdown. It's about halfway through the track, and it's so effective. Honestly, that gives everything Death Heaven has ever made a run for their money. Honestly, just sit back and soak this one in and thank me later. And just the ending soundscape of this track is so gorgeous. I love it to death. It's just so warm, yet so brutal at the same time. It's quite a unique experience. And the track that ends this album off is the 12-minute long, glacially paced Infinite Purgatory. So it starts off with just this massive fuzzy bass just explosion, and it actually reminds me a lot of the latest Hum record. And we get these really nice beautiful vocals from Chris yet again, and I gotta say, this is Chris's best album vocally, and the movement of these guitars is just galaxy levels of huge. Now, I did say that this is my least favorite track on the album, This is true, but I can't help but just love the soundscapes here. It's so big, it's so massive, and it's really emotionally evocative. It's just great. But the issue here is just that it doesn't move nearly as much as the other tracks did. But what's here is perfectly fine. But I will say that the lyrics here are emotionally crushing. And at the end of the vocal bit, it's all layered in a way that just, it gives you chills. And the guitars, they descend just a little bit. It's not even that far on the scale. But just the way it does that, it's just like, nope, you're not good. You're really not. And it's so sad. And the whole thing rounds off with more beachy samples, and you hear that distant guitar and distant drum groove, and it all just rounds itself off amazingly, and I love it so much. And while this track doesn't necessarily take bits from other tracks as recognizably, that ending sample is just fine. Final thoughts on the album. Wow, amazing. So far, this is Chris's magnum opus. If he improves on the next album, I will be genuinely shocked. And this is just another reason that 2019 was a phenomenal year for music. Honestly, I could go on like a 20-minute speech just naming fantastic albums from 2019. Yeah, this is a very sonically pleasing album and has a lot of emotional heights too, or lows for this instance. And there are amazing instrumentals on every piece of this thing. Yeah, I'm feeling a based and red pilled here. This thing is epic. It's so good. Check it out. Please support Chris. Please support Clouds Collide. Buy yourself one of these shirts. Buy the vinyl of that album, because look at that thing. That splatter effect is gorgeous. If I had a record player, I would listen to this thing pretty often. But oh man, if I ever hear anything like this ever again, it's gonna be it's a good day. So that's Clouds Collide discography so far. I kind of wanted to wait for the new album to come out whenever that was gonna happen, but I just really wanted to get into it. I really wanted something to make me happy after genre January. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys could do me a huge favor, go follow Chris on Instagram. Go just like all his Facebook stuff, like all his posts on Instagram, listen to his records, heck, buy them if you like them enough, but you will, because they're great. But other than that, that's about it from me. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, go ahead and comment down below, or, my social medias will be in the description underneath Chris's stuff, of course. So if you want to talk to me there, go ahead and do that, because I'd love that. And go ahead and spam his Rate Your Music stuff with 5-star reviews, because he deserves it. And that's about it. So hope to see you guys next time. Hope you guys are having a good day. Have a good one. Bye.